Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy emotionally driven stories that linger with you long after the video ends. These are the kinds of stories that aren't loud, aren't rushed, but quietly settle into your heart. And if you stay until the end, you might find yourself thinking about this one longer than you expect. Claire had arrived at the lake early that morning, hoping for a quiet escape from the heavy weight that had settled in her chest over the past 2 years since her husband passed away. The world felt too loud, too demanding, and her mind too full of memories and regrets to allow her to simply breathe. But here, by the water, she could almost forget for a little while. She laid her towel carefully on the warm wooden dock, feeling the sun instantly kiss her skin and the gentle breeze from the water brush through her hair. The lake stretched out before her like a silver mirror, calm and endless, reflecting the pale blue of the morning sky and the scattered clouds drifting lazily above. Birds called to one another across the water, and the soft rustle of the leaves along the shore created a natural symphony that made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that the world could still be beautiful. She closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the sun, letting herself sink into the quiet, listening to the rhythm of the gentle waves and the distant laughter of children playing somewhere along the shore. And for a moment, she allowed herself to feel free, unburdened, light, as if time had paused just for her, giving her a chance to breathe without the relentless pull of grief. Her thoughts wandered to her husband, to the life they had built together, and the sudden emptiness that had replaced his presence. Though the sadness still lingered, it felt softer here, touched by the warmth of the sun and the serene beauty of the lake. Claire had grown used to the quiet rooms of her house, the unspoken ache that followed her through each day, and the long nights when memories of the past filled her mind with both sweetness and sorrow. She had learned how to survive, but she wasn't sure she had truly learned how to live again. Her mind drifted back to the years when the lake had been a shared place, a retreat for laughter and conversation. She remembered the way her husband used to hold her hand while they watched their son Daniel play along the shore, splashing water without a care in the world. The memory made her chest tighten. For a moment, tears threatened to rise, but she blinked them away and instead focused on the world around her. The warmth of the sun on her arms, the softness of the towel beneath her, the gentle sway of the dock beneath her weight, the scent of fresh water mixed with pine and earth. And slowly, quietly, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Contentment. Just as she was beginning to settle into the comfort of being alone with her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching along the dock. Light, careful, hesitant. She opened her eyes. Daniel stood a few feet away, holding 2 bottles of lemonade. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the wooden boards of the dock. He looked older somehow, more certain. Yet in his eyes she could still see the boy she remembered. The sight of him brought a small smile to her lips. "I thought you might want one," he said softly, holding out a bottle. Claire reached out to take it, her fingers brushing lightly against his. The simple gesture filled her with a warmth she hadn't expected, the quiet comfort of being seen and cared for. Daniel sat down beside her, leaving a small respectful space between them. For a while neither of them spoke. They simply watched the lake together. The silence between them wasn't empty. It carried memories, shared loss, and a quiet understanding that words weren't always necessary. For the first time in weeks, Claire didn't feel alone. And as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, she had the strange feeling that this simple moment by the lake might be the beginning of something she hadn't allowed herself to imagine before. A small step toward healing. Daniel sat beside Claire on the dock, the sun warming their shoulders as a gentle breeze moved across the surface of the lake. For a while they simply sat together in silence, watching the ripples spread slowly across the water. Claire took a sip of the lemonade and let the cool sweetness settle on her tongue. It was such a small thing, yet it felt comforting in a way she hadn't expected. Daniel rested his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the far edge of the lake where the trees reflected perfectly in the still water. "I used to come here with Dad all the time," he said quietly. Claire nodded, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest. She remembered those days clearly, the fishing rods leaning against the dock, the sandwiches wrapped in paper, the laughter that had once filled the warm summer air. Back then, everything had felt simple, safe, whole. Daniel glanced toward her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried memories that didn't need explanation. I didn't come here much after he passed, Daniel continued after a moment. It felt strange without him. Claire understood that feeling more than she could explain. The world had felt different ever since that day, as if the colors had faded slightly, leaving behind only echoes of what used to be. I know, she said softly. For a few seconds they both watched a pair of ducks glide across the lake, leaving gentle trails in the water behind them. Daniel let out a slow breath. Sometimes I think I tried to grow up too fast after he was gone, he admitted. I thought I had to be strong for you. Claire turned toward him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. You didn't have to do that, she said gently. I know, he replied. But it felt like the right thing to do. Claire studied his face, the quiet determination in his eyes, the small lines of responsibility that had appeared over the past few years. She suddenly realized how much he had carried on his own. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes still held a trace of sadness. I wasn't sure if I was doing anything right, he admitted. There were days I felt completely lost. Claire understood that feeling too well. There are still days I feel that way, she said. Daniel looked at her with surprise. You do? Of course, she replied with a small laugh. Losing someone you love doesn't come with instructions on how to move forward. The wind stirred again, gently rippling the water. For a moment they both watched the sunlight sparkle across the lake's surface, as if the water itself were made of tiny pieces of glass reflecting the morning light. I think Dad would have liked this morning, Daniel said after a while. Claire felt her throat tighten again, but this time the feeling carried a strange warmth with it. Yes, she said softly. I think he would have. They fell quiet once more, but this silence felt different from the others they had shared over the past 2 years. It was lighter, more peaceful. Claire realized something in that moment. Grief had kept them both locked in their own quiet worlds, afraid to speak too deeply about the pain they carried. But sitting here together, watching the lake the way they once had as a family, something inside her finally began to loosen. Maybe we should come here more often, Daniel suggested suddenly. Claire looked at him, surprised again. You'd want that? Daniel nodded. I think it might help. She smiled gently. I think you're right. A soft breeze moved across the dock again, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water through the air. Claire leaned back slightly, letting the sun warm her face as she listened to the quiet sounds around them. The water, the birds, the distant laughter of people farther down the shore. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel quite as heavy as it once had. And though she didn't know what the coming days would bring, she realized something important as she sat there beside her son. Healing didn't always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes it began with something simple. A quiet morning, a peaceful lake, and someone you love sitting beside you, reminding you that life was still moving forward. The morning slowly drifted toward midday as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The lake had grown busier now. A few small boats moved quietly across the water, and families had begun arriving along the shoreline, their voices blending softly with the sounds of nature. But on the dock, Claire and Daniel remained in their own quiet space. Claire finished the last sip of her lemonade and placed the empty bottle beside her. For a moment she watched the sunlight shimmer across the water, feeling something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not sadness. Not exactly happiness either. Something calmer. Something like peace. Daniel leaned back on his hands, stretching his legs out in front of him. I almost didn't come today, he admitted suddenly. Claire turned her head toward him. Why not? Daniel hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. I wasn't sure if you wanted company, he said. You've seemed distant lately. Claire looked back at the lake, thinking about that. He wasn't wrong. Since her husband had passed away, she had slowly built invisible walls around herself. At first it had been a way to protect her heart, to keep the grief from overwhelming her. But over time those walls had also kept people out. Even Daniel. I suppose I didn't realize how much I'd been doing that, she said quietly. Daniel nodded, understanding more than she expected. I think we both did, he said. For a few seconds they sat in thoughtful silence. A small breeze moved across the lake, creating soft ripples that caught the sunlight in bright flashes. Claire suddenly remembered something. Do you remember the time you tried to build a raft out of those old wooden boards? She asked with a faint smile. Daniel laughed instantly. Oh no, you're bringing that up? Claire laughed too, the sound surprising even herself. You were convinced it would float. It did float, Daniel protested. For about 10 seconds, Claire replied.